looking at probably looking at something unusual, but from a limited point of view. This is what I've been doing with these. So let's just see where we are. That's done. It's all still sounding okay.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Good. Right. So far so good. Right. So brilliant. So last night I taught using a completely new package, and it was something that I was trying to show you last night, Steve.
Okay.
Hang on a minute. Everything's gone to thingamajig. There it is. Bingo. Right. So we basically, this would be familiar to Peter. This is a foggy hole, or a Fogou, which is in Cornwall. Now, Peter.
Not Aligi, is it?
No, this is this is Haligi, yeah. I thought, yeah, sorry, my head went there. Yes, this is Haligi. So
it certainly is a big one, Pete, inside, yeah.
Yeah, you've been to this one. You can actually tell from the scale on there.
Yeah.
That this is, if you look at the main passage, and there's been a number of programs about these which have been broadcast, and we know about 20 of these foggy holes of
Fogou.
Fogous in Cornwall, but you did arrangement there, and this is a bit of a cross section where the flat corbels themselves have actually collapsed, and obviously they've removed them, and this is going down into the passage, and
losing your sound,
we say that again, Pete.
We seem to be losing your sound.
Oh no, please.
You're talking and then it goes silent.
Oh,
I'm not sure where it's meant to, whether it's. So you're silent again now.
So
I've been absolutely. I've been absolutely dreading this today, and this happening again, and it's happened again.
Well,
absolutely.
What sound system did you use last night?
It's gone again, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exactly. Last night we had a couple of problems for about 5 minutes, and then I managed to continue from about.
Yeah, it went well. Went really well.
We managed to do all the way from about 4 to 8, all the way to 10 o'clock without any problems at all. And now
the time of day with high usage?
Now you're saying it's breaking up again.
Like I said, is it a time of day with high usage?
Oh, great. So, it was sounding okay at the beginning, yeah?
Yep.
Yep, fine.
And it does in between now, it just seems it goes off. It's probably high usage for this time of day.
Oh. Right.
Oh, there you
right,
go.
okay. Right. Okay. I'm just wondering if I'll just cut the images out now. Is that sounding okay?
Yep.
It's sounding clear.
Yep.
It might actually be the images. It could be. So at any point, let me know whether it breaks up again, and we'll go from there. So in Cornwall, we know about these structures, and they're underground passages that seemingly go nowhere, and they usually start often with some steps, some with multiple entrances, as we've seen at Carn-Yenny, and with Hiligi, it's quite an interesting arrangement. Hiligi is closed for a number of months of the year because it's got some rare bats down there. And what people have thought about these underground passages, these underground structures, is that they were sometimes used for sanctuary. They were sometimes used to keep food dry, or food in a sense of a larder. So that's been suggested. The people have mentioned them for ritual worship and all these wonderful things, but we don't really have a true idea what these structures were about. And that's the problem. When you go to the likes of Orkney, we don't call them in Orkney. We don't actually call them fogous or foggy holes. We actually call them souterrains. Now it's rather interesting that and this is all sounding okay, is it?
Yep.
That's good.
Right, it's the images. Okay, so I can't use images. Oh, great. Let's probably be a bit more expression. I can do this because this is what I've been doing for years without images. You know, when I was first teaching, we didn't have any images at all. So it was just like trying to explain to people these different things. So when you've been around the block a few more times, you can be a bit more descriptive. So if I see this, that you've got these underground structures, and overall we don't really know what they're used for. Some in an Orcadian context and some in a Cornish context are sometimes seen to be an extension of the home. And what I mean by that, you've got the building above, and you've got everything going on above, and then you've got steps that seem to go down into an underground passageway, and sometimes leading into a structure at the end. But sometimes this structure at the end is really, really difficult to define. So this is why we're struggling with understanding what they are. Lots of these things actually don't go anywhere. So when you actually go down the steps, they don't actually come out anywhere. They just end up going nowhere. Not all of them are actually associated with homes. Now this is the rather strange thing, because in archaeology, what we sometimes do, we like to put things into categories. And sometimes when you put things into categories, there's a danger with that, because you miss the detail. So if we say, for example, talk that there's about 20 odd of these foggy holes, so these fogous in Cornwall, and if we sort of say that there may have been up to 100 at one stage, or 1,000, let's just pick any figure out the air. This is what we're doing, right? In Cornwall at one stage, and we do believe that they date from 1,000 years, and occasionally one might be found every other decade or so. So some new ones are found, and the most odd ones are ones that are actually just found in fields, and they're associated with nothing, and those are the really odd ones. Now, the whole point of this, when we started doing these classes, was that I wanted for us to think outside the box, i.e. the line, Tim Ingall's The Line, and that endless line that in other words represents humanity, just an endless progression. And this is why last week, and we tried this yesterday, I mentioned labyrinths and mazes. Now, when you think about the labyrinth and the maze, the context of the labyrinth and the maze is very similar to these foggy holes. You may not see it, but I do, because when anyone ever goes into a labyrinth starts from A and goes to B, and that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else, right? And that's very similar to a foggy hole. You go down these steps on a rope ladder underground, and you just keep going, and you get somewhere, and you think, right, that's it, and you turn back, right? And in many ways, this is what a labyrinth is. But I'm dismissing the fact that there's a purpose, because there's a purpose with everything. No matter how mundane and how obvious and how things can be very superficial, there is always an end game. So if you say, for example, these foggy holes, me and Pete could have this really nice discussion. We don't have any images in front of us, which is a shame, but we could have this nice little discussion and talk about what these foggy holes were for, what this sort of structure underground was for. And it sort of it turns a little bit to the left, or it turns a little to the right. And if it turns over to the right, it might go into a little chamber as we go with Carn-Yenny. And with the one at Hiligi, you just briefly saw it. It almost looked like there was one sort of passageway and another passageway leading off, and that was it. And there's not seemingly going anywhere, right? And we could have a discussion what they were for, right? And this is the problem with archaeology, that when we look at archaeology, we always like to put things into boxes. So say, for example, we look at the Great Pyramids of ancient Egypt, and we say, right, the 90 pyramids of ancient Egypt, or 100, or however many that there were initially, right? But the ones that survived, there's about 90 of them. It's surprising that. But there's you've got the Bent Pyramid at Dozer, you've got the three at Giza, and you've got a few others, and all the rest look like and nothing like the Great Pyramids at Giza. So we assume that they're all used for the same thing. But because they're being constructed over an incredibly long period of time, we can't really say that they're all used for the same thing. So as one structure has been used 1,000 years before another structure, even though they look similar, it doesn't mean to say that they were used for the same use. So this is a danger in archaeology, right? And the same thing can be said with everything in archaeology. When I've been to many lectures to do the archaeology and history, and Peter has, and Stephen has, and Richard has, right? And you get people standing in front of you, and they say, right, this is this, and this is this, and this comes together, and everything's nice, and everything's a nice bowl of roses, right? But the one thing that I like doing is, as we did yesterday, and to be honest with you, Pete, my Tuesday lectures shouldn't be going on for 2.5 hours, but they do, right? Simply because we go off into so many different angles. We don't actually look at the textbook, and we don't actually read everything in front of us. And what we do, we analyze it, and we go off into all these different tangents where we're meant to be, right? My first lecture down this end, right? Because I've done 2 classes now. The first one, it was interesting that there was this first one. This woman stood up in the room, and she said, "But everything that you've been saying, right, is based on what you think." And I said, "That's right." And she said, "Well, how do we know anything that you're saying is real, or how do we know anything that you're saying?" And then this is the same woman that turns up this week, pays me £50, and signs up for the next 2 months. So that's really interesting, because what she's doing is that she's questioning me, which is really good. And then she's still coming along, and she wants to learn something. So that's the best way of doing archaeology. Because back to what we're talking about here with these souterrains and these foggy holes, right? Foggies in Cornwall and these souterrains in Orkney. And if we just leave the foggy holes a minute, and we just leave them there a second, and we go to the experience that I've had in Orkney, with souterrains in Orkney. Now, excuse me, Peter, but I do believe you went down in one souterrain with me. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Did we do 2? Or because I know
two, did at least 2, yeah.
Yeah, because there was one in the middle of Kirkwall, which is basically the capital city of Orkney. and there was one in the middle of nowhere as well. And there's also several others, and there's also one at a place called Minehow, not Micehow, Peter, but Minehow, right? So Minehow is basically it's a series of steps that just go down into the ground, right? And then that's it. And you have this experience, and you go down to the bottom, and there's like this weird little box in the bottom, and you're thinking it just goes into the earth, and you're thinking, well, what the hell is all this about? Right? That's Minehow. Right? That's a series of steps that just go more or less. I'm not going to say vertically into the ground, but you know what I mean. Steps going down technically vertically. Well, the other ones that we there was something called Grain House, which is the one in Kirkwall, and I think that's the one. And then there's one a bit further out as well, which we also saw. And
the one was on a farm.
Yeah, that's right. It was on a farm. It was on a farm. It was near Kirkwall, right? Now the one in Kirkwall, Grain House, Grain Barn House, I think it is. It's Grain something anyway. Sorry to be so vague. When we had the key and we went down there, and it was like it was going down underground. And when you've gone down underground, you've got a passageway that leads from one thingamajig and down a cobbled passageway to another thing at the end, right? And it was really tight and narrow, right? And we were all in there. It was dark and damp, right? And there was these pillars either side supporting the roof, and it was dark and damp, right? Now, one thing that springs to mind is what the hell is this thing about, right? It's too, and you look in a modern context, right? And you look in a modern context and you think dark and damp. How do we know it wasn't dark and damp back then as well? Right. So what we do, we take things from the past and we reconstruct them how we believe that they were, right? But how do we know they weren't dark and damp in the past anyway? Because nothing much has changed above. You know what I'm trying to say? So the ground is still the same above as it's always been, right? And whether there was a building on top or not, it's always going to be dark and damp, because Orkney's dark and damp. You know, in the winter months, it can be a very wet place. It's a beautiful place. I love it, but it can be. So we went underground, and it was like that idea following that journey, right? And then in the as you looked around, and there was these pillars, and it was quite narrow. It was only big enough there was 5 of us to go down, and that was it. You couldn't fit any more people down there, right? And then this is Iron Age and no more than 2,500 years old. And then your mind starts to go a bit, and you start to, if you were down there, if you were locked down there for a whole day, right, with food and drink and a light, right, your mind would start to alter. It would be one of those things. These places are in some ways like a rite of passage, right? So we can think about some of these ones in Cornwall as being an idea of a rite of passage, going along a journey, right? Back to that idea of the line. You're going along that journey, right? Whatever the journey is, you go. And then there was some underground. I said, well, so if you can imagine where I am now, if I walk from the back end of this caravan to the front and kept going, right, that's basically the length of this thing underground. So there's this one chamber, there's a passageway, and there's like another weird little chamber at the end, which really isn't, right? And it's hacked out of the mud in the earth. You can clearly see that. And then in the sides, there's like little holes which have been dug. So you might get some stonework, and then there might be a little hole. And the concept that I introduced was communication. Was actually communication into the earth. And the reason why you've got the holes in the side, right? These square or circular holes in the side, was that you could actually sort of talk into these holes. Right now, this is not a bizarre concept, but it's a real concept, because the one thing that we forget about our ancestors is that they spoke, right? I know that sounds bizarre, right? But one of the things that we think about our ancestors is that we know that they lived, we know that they existed, we know that they built these things, we know that they ate and drank, we know they had relationships, we know that they had animals, and we know that they killed. We know that all these things that we know about, and we know about all these different things. But one of the things that we don't really understand is their communication. How did they in every way communicate? Right now, where I am, right. This is going to sound odd. Where I am, there's there's two things I want to mention, and I'm going to mention this. Where I am, there's a ruined cottage, right? And usually, if I'm over by the cottage at night, where there's a gate, I go and I talk to the cottage, right? I know the name of the cottage. I know that cottage itself is really strange because nobody knows who owns it, right? It's a ruined cottage. It's in the middle of nowhere, and nobody knows who owns it, right? You know, we could own it, but we don't know, right? But anyway, I have this communication, right? It's nice and calm. I have this communication, right? Anyway, so I think of that, and anyway, I'll go back to these souterrains underground, and one of the university lecturers, he said, the reason why you've got these holes underground in this well-built structure, and suddenly you've got these holes, is that people would shout into them, people would call into them, people wouldn't need to leave votive offerings. They would scream into them, and they would be angry. They would say, you know, something's gone wrong today. You know, why is it gone wrong? Why is this happening to me? Why is everything going wrong? And you put all the anger into this hole. You shout into it. You scream into it. You're underground. Nobody can hear you. Nobody can hear you scream. Remember that from Aliens. In space, nobody can hear you scream, right? But nobody underground can hear you scream either. Nobody can hear you have this communication, right? Now, the other thing that I wanted to do today, right? I sat down and I said no. I was going to show you some images of the roundhouse as it's developing, right? And I just thought, right, you're going to ask too many questions because it's not the way I want it to be. But it's got 5 sets of uprights in the middle, right, with lintels on, and then you've got a row of lintels around the outside. That's as I said, right. But I thought you might be thinking, well, this is slightly different from Stonehenge, but to me it is like Stonehenge, right? So what I'm trying to get is that they're all different concepts. There's all different ways of looking at the past, right? Now, one of the most important things that I always say to people, and this actually works, right, is when you go to an archaeological historical site, don't take a guidebook with you. Don't look at the notices. Don't look at the signs. Don't do any research. Just go there, right? Just go there and experience it, right? The worst thing to do with Stonehenge is go to Stonehenge with a guide. But unfortunately, Peter, you can't go to Stonehenge without a guide. No. You're not allowed to. You've got to listen to what they tell you. I don't know if you're on that trip with me, Peter, but were you on? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? And the problem is we were unable to experience Stonehenge without being told what to do, which to be honest with you, that kicked me in the teeth, because everyone had paid 25 quid a head to get into Stonehenge, another £15 to go on a bloody minibus, right? So it was a real trip, but I was unable to talk to you. And it's not the only place that this has happened. We had a trip to, you weren't on this, people. We had a trip to
in Bath. You had the same thing.
Yeah, but you weren't in Bath, though, were you?
Yes, I was in Bath when what's his name fell over, and you were giving him first aid.
Yeah. Oh, that you were there. Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that we were being lectured to.
They told you not to.
Yeah, and some of them said bollocks to this, so we're listening to him.
Well, yes, true. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the whole point of you being there with me. You may as well just gone down on a train and go by yourself, in other words, right?
Well, I had been in the past.
Yeah, but it was like another experience, and it was another experience going with me that one of the parties should fall over. I should close a whole museum gallery and sort out the first aid and all the bloody rest of it. But that's the reason why you go on trips with me, because something odd happens like that, which was really brilliant. dead impressed with that, Pete. I've never looked back on that with any. I thought, right, I did exactly the right thing, even more or less forcing aspirins down his throat. But everything was fine. But
the
anyway,
only thing wrong was trying to take a pulse with your thumb. You can't take a pulse with your thumb because it's got its own pulse.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Thanks. I knew you'd find some mistake, but other than that, yeah, I know.
It was brilliant. It was good. Oh, it was good. Yeah.
But that all said, Peter, but the concept was that we weren't allowed to think, but you were thinking, and we were telling you, and that was great. Yeah. So this is one thing that I say about historical sites, that it's always good to go to these places and try and imagine it yourself without any other interpretation. And this is really, really important when you're trying to understand the past and you're trying to understand how the past really, really operates. And back to these souterrains, this idea of shouting into these holes was given to me by one of the university lecturers at the University of Highlands and Islands. He said, "But this is what I believe, right?" And I thought it was actually a pretty good theory, because nothing else made any sense. Nothing really made any sense. But then you've got to ask yourself the reason. You've got to ask yourself, how do people in the past come to these, come to what they're creating, right? And when I'm thinking about the roundhouse, I've created something without knowing what I've created, and it's exactly the same as something that I didn't want to create, i.e. Stonehenge. I didn't want to build bloody Stonehenge in the middle of a field in West Wales. I really didn't, but I have, right? And I've made it out of wood. And I just thought, well, how did I come to that, right? So anyway, so what we've mentioned is these souterrains in Orkney, right? Now, one thing I wanted to mention is going back to these foggy holes in Cornwall, right? All 20 of them, all however many there were at one stage. And I believe that the idea for all of these foggy holes might be very different from one community to the next. Because, I've been to Cornwall. I've been to Cornwall a lot less than Pete, but I've probably been to Cornwall maybe 8 times. Which is a lot more than most people. I've been to Cornwall about 8 times, right? Maybe more, actually. No, 10.
But you're going there for archaeology, not for a holiday.
I've been there for archaeology on a holiday, Pete. But yeah. I've done both. But anyway, the point is that when you look at these foggy holes, one community may have used them for storing eggs, right? Another community may have used it because they didn't feel very happy with their neighbors, and they may have used it for sanctuary. Another foggy hole may have been used for some weird pseudo-religious belief that we don't really know. And another foggy hole,
Carnooney and Alhiggy are so different.
Yes.
Carnooney, there was a reason for it. It was quite a big space within. Alhiggy is simply a passage, a long passage.
Two long
passages, yes, because it branches off, yes.
Should we actually try the image a minute and see if we get a case?
Yeah.
Let's be.
In Carnooney, when we were there, we noticed this algae on the walls, which was almost luminous. And a similar thing is in Alhiggy.
So there this is. Are you seeing this on your screen?
Yeah.
Yep. Are you hearing me?
We are.
Yes. Yeah.
Right now, this is exactly the experience that Peter was talking about. Right now, on the left-hand side, it says modern steps and current entrance, possible site of original entrance. But people believe that might not have been the original entrance anyway. But say it is, right? For the sake of argument, let's just say it is, right? So if you go up again, you've got site of antiquarian entrance. So that can be dismissed, right? And if we, and this is what this entranceway looks like.
Yeah. Yep.
You've got this straight passage.
Yep.
And then whatever this word creep is, right? Then you go up along a long curved passage, right? And then it sort of goes here, and it's a sort of side compartment, which doesn't make sense, and that's all there is, right? So this is all there is.
All cut out of solid rock.
And it's all cut out of solid rock. So what is going on? But there is one other thing that, well, there's lots of other things. Pete is very right. They're two different structures, right? Well, we'll go on to my my internet search, right? And I'm going to show you Carn-Yenny, right? As this is going okay at this minute, we'll have a little look at Carn-Yenny, right? But you might think that this is built for one purpose, and then suddenly somebody says, "Oh, what we'll add another long curved passage," right? Now, can I talk a bit of madness? Yeah.
Mm.
You're both hearing me loud and clear.
Yep.
Yep. Go.
My son, for example, right, has said to me, Dad, he said he wants me in here to actually build an air raid shelter, because he's absolutely obsessed that we're going to have a nuclear war. And it might sound funny and strange, right? But he is obsessed that we're going to have a nuclear war, right? So he's saying what we need to do, we need to build a fallout shelter, we need to do this, we need to do that, right? And he's giving me this lecture about what I should do on land that I own, right? And this is what he's actually telling me, right? And this is Carn-Yenny, by the way, right? This, if we look at that little plan there.
No, we can't see it, Carl.
Right. Okay. Well, we are going to see it. We're going to see it. We're not going to let this go tits up. Right. So here we go. We're going to see this now. Right. I was just right, so we got that there, and we go there. Right. Got it. The Fogou.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Creep passage. Right, I can describe what that creep passage is, right? But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to continue what my son was saying. He said, "Let's build this thing." Right? Okay. We build this structure, right? And it it's concreted and all the rest of it, and we got supplies down and all the rest of it, right? And then in about a month's time, right, this idea of us having a nuclear war's gone out the window, right? So we take all the food out of it. We've got this hole in the ground, and we just abandon it. What is that going to look like to future generations? Is it going to look like we built a fallout shelter? What's it going to look like? What's it going to mean to future generations? Why did we need to build a fallout shelter? Because you're not going to survive a nuclear war anyway, right? So this is the thing, you see. Humanity comes up with these ideas, but we haven't really thought them through. My son's not thought this through, right? I'm certainly not going to build a nuclear fallout shelter, right? I don't have the money of a rich oligarch to build something that I'm going to survive underground forever, right? It's just not going to happen, right? So when you actually bring this into perspective, what you've got is that this here is the settlement above ground, right? And you can see that there is a structure. All these are structures above ground. All these here, right? And then underground, if you go over here, this is the foggy hole, Foggy, the foggy hole, foggy, right? So what it is, you've got this creep passage, right? And what this is a really narrow passage, right, that leads into the rest of this complex. Now, and then what we do believe is that maybe way in the past, maybe this may have collapsed either end, right? Or there's an entrance in from one way or the other, right? But you're thinking about this is certainly not defensive, because if it's defensive, anyone can get in. And the other thing as well is, right, if it's defensive, all you need to do is take up one of the slabs above it and you're into the chamber anyway. It's not very defensive, so it can't be defensive. So the other thing as well is what we've got here, we've got a corbelled chamber. Now, that corbelled chamber doesn't fit with the rest of the passageway. Now, it's almost as if it's added on. What does that mean? Yeah, and the other thing as well is this is certainly constructed before the village, because you can't build something like this with a village on top because it's just too fiddly, right? And you can't do corbelling without building this first. So you have to build this first before you build the village, right? So why are they building this anyway? What is the meaning of the other thing as well is if you're going to run away and hide from anybody, right? The first thing you're going to do is build the village, and then you're going to build the thing under the ground, right? Usually when you're building a sanctuary type thing, it's usually like a second thought, right? So when you're getting deep into what these foggy holes mean, right? Is really, really interesting, right? Now, what I'm going to do is, again, I want us to follow this idea. Now, this is Carn-Yenny. This is that, you know, the one end I just showed there. This is one entrance into it, right? And you've got, this is underground as well. These huge boulders. This is the passageway underground. Now, it's not exactly something you can stand up in and run along, right? It's quite constricting. It's quite low bearing, right? And that there would have supported the village above, which is a very, very important thing. And this is what Peter was on about. Peter, describe what was on the wall in here.
Well, if there you can see that green showing up, and that's a green algae. And the same thing was in Fogou, in Aligi.
Yeah. And the thing is, Pete, am I right or wrong in saying that when you shine the torch on this and then you put your torch out, the thing glows?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
It glows. Now, that thing on the end there is like a little niche, right? And then people think, right, this has definitely got to be a temple, right? This has definitely got to be a temple. Right? The thing is, right, that has been added on at a later date. It's not part of the original structure. It doesn't look
storage.
It doesn't look like, does it, Pete? If that was part of the original thing, in other words, you may have had like a long passageway leading into the corbelled chamber. Why have you got this corbelled chamber on the side? It doesn't make sense. So, yeah, storage. But why was this passageway originally built? If it's not exactly going anywhere, right? And these are the questions that you've got to ask yourself, right? Now, one thing I don't do, and one thing I am going to do today, because I'm just on a bit of a roll, trying to be on a
Carl, I sent you some pictures of the Fogou in
because
Jersey.
it's the first time I've managed to do this. Yes, you know that. It's very odd. Very odd, Pete. And they Pete said, yeah, you do get foggies in other places. There's one that I know of in Wales, and Pete's talking about the one in Jersey. We've actually gone onto the Wikipedia page, right? Everything that I've said, you've got these foggy holes. Cornwall, we've got that associated with an Iron Age settlement. Excavations on the site have shown that there was activity going way back into the Neolithic period. We know that the huts themselves dating to about 200 years BC, and if we want to be a bit thingy, the foggy hole must have existed before them. Carn-Yenny is best known for the what just below the surface of the ground and is roofed slabs. Important. Although the exact purpose of these fogous is still a mystery, possibilities include storage, habitation, or ritual, and it was abandoned in the late Roman period. So this is a thing. What do these things mean? What do these things exactly mean? So what we're going to do now is I'm on a roll, we're gonna type in this here. We're going to
breaking up.
and we're going to type in. It's breaking up now, is it?
Your sound was, yeah.
Right. Okay. Then what we're going to do? We're going to mention this here. It says the Grin Earth House is not a house, but a long underground passage leading to a large chamber. It was probably used as cold storage area and possibly as a refuge in times of trouble. I'm just going to put the lighting on a minute, guys. Hang on 1 second. Bingo. It's good to have light. Is that so? Basically, it has broken up. Is it because I put the internet on? Yeah.
It was breaking up a wee bit when you've just been discussing this last point. Yeah.
Right. So it is, and basically what it's saying there, it's talking about the this building on Kirkwall. It was probably used as a cold storage area and possibly as a refuge in times of trouble. Again, this idea of a refuge. So what we're going to do, we're going to get off that now, and you can be able to hear me again properly. So yeah, we have discovered what the problem is, obviously, right? So Stephen, after hearing all this, what do you think about these souterrains, these underground chambers, these foggy holes? What sense do they make to you? What do they? I don't know if this is the first time you've ever seen these things or experienced these things or understood these things, but what are they saying to you? Iron Age, 2,500 years old at most. You've just heard a couple of descriptions with the best that you could hear from me saying. What do you think?
Well, it strikes me that all of the explanations are plausible in terms of places for storage or if people would hide in them. I wonder whether the purpose of them changed over time. I'm just minded to think about sort of Victorian houses and cellars, which the original intention of the cellar was a place of effectively a storage, but not necessarily habitation. No. But over time, become a place of habitation. So you can look at a Victorian house now and think, well, in terms of modern living, it would just be a basement space where you could go and, I don't know, either have a gym or you would have a man cave or whatever one you call it. But they were never intended for that. No. And this is the problem with the past. Do you know? You've actually led me into something else, which I wanted to say earlier on. Right. If you go onto the internet after this now, we're not going to go back onto the internet because we're going to lose it all again. Right. And the reason why I've muted and taken Richard off, right, is I'm gonna put Richard's voice back on now, right? Because I wanted to see if that may have been a problem. I put Richard's voice back on. Now, after this today, if you write the word Rousey down, Rousay, Rousey, right? And you visit a site on Rousey called Mid-How. It's a Neolithic burial chamber. Right. Now, that was discovered in the 1940s, and what they did at Mid-How, they built an aircraft hangar over it in about 1947 or something like that. Right. So what they did, they excavated the whole thing. And what Mid-How is, it's called a corbelled, passaged Neolithic burial chamber. So basically, what it is, it's and what it is, you go down a path and there's on there's little niches on the left and right as you go down, and there's a stone slab, and when they were excavating, they would find bones on this stone slab, and it was Neolithic, right? But they found that there was a problem with their analysis, right? And what the problem was with the analysis, are you still there, guys? Yeah.
Right. What the problem is with the analysis was that when they started looking at the data, they started to find Iron Age stuff in there, right? Yeah. So So the archaeologist said, hang on, this is Neolithic. So why are we finding Iron Age stuff in it? Why are we finding habitational stuff in here, right? And what it turned out that after this thing had been long forgotten, somebody in the Iron Age was rooting around, and they thought, oh, right, brilliant, there's loads of stone here, we'll put a building on top, right? We'll put a building directly on top of this structure because it's got a good view of the landscape, right? And it's perfect place, right? So we put a building on top, right? So what they then did, they broke into the chamber underneath, right? And they started using it for storage and all sorts of things, right? So this burial chamber was actually used for storage, which is a really difficult concept, because they couldn't work out why. And then the penny dropped that there was a habitational site above. They weren't using this thing underneath for burial anymore. They were actually using it for storage, and this is what they did, right? And it's the same concept as today. Now, in Bridgend, by Newcastle Hill, there's a pub at the bottom on the right as you're looking up Newcastle Hill, right? And on the left, there's a little chapel. Now, I can remember that chapel when the graves were actually arranged inside that yard, right? So what they've done, they've removed all the graves to the side, and they've used, I think it's used as a parking area, right? Now, who could have ever thought that would actually happen 100 years after the last person who was actually buried there? But that's exactly what happened. So in other words, it's moved from a burial ground to a parking area, and it's the same. It's this. Imagine having a burial ground used as a playground. That happens. It's not a concept that we can actually put in our minds. It's the same thing. You know, when you get chapels and churches being sold, right, and they're converted to houses, and they're converted to flats. In Barry, for example, there's some very big churches in Barry that have been completely converted into housing. So places that I can remember going into and singing in the choir, right, are now being used for accommodation. So where the chancel is, there's somebody's house, and there's toilets, and there's the shower, and there's the sitting room in the chancel of the church. And 20 years on, after the last use of that building, this is exactly what's happening, right? And it's just trying to justify all that, and it's just trying to understand that is the situation with these structures, right? So back to the subject that we actually started off with, the souterrains in Scotland and the foggy holes in Cornwall. The aspect of understanding what these structures are is not necessarily being obsessed by the detail, right? You should only be obsessed with your interpretation, because your interpretation could be right, because as these structures have been used over thousands of years, you know, for example, they could have been used for everything. And in fact, if we look at it this way, right, when castles were built in Wales on a massive scale after the conquest of native Wales in 1282, 1283, Edward I decided to build these massive castles in Conway, Carnarvon, you've got Beaumaris, you've got Harlech, a number of other castles, right? So all of these castles were built, right, with the aim that they could be supplied by the sea if they're attacked in their individual castles, right? Well, who would have thought that in 1969 Carnarvon Castle would be used as a place of peace for the investiture of Prince Charles, right? It's supposed to be a defensive site, but it's used to sort of crown a prince. And you're thinking, right, okay, that's not really the original purpose, is it? And then you start to look at these things in a pseudo way, and you start to sort of think that over time, historical sites have been used for many different things and have meant many different things to many different people. So I wanted to, as we've managed to work out what the problem is with these classes, the images, It seems a bit of a. Actually, do you know when we were showing the images for a little bit? Then in the little slideshow.
Yeah.
That worked, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I went onto the internet, it didn't.
It seemed to cut out at that point. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we know about that one. Good. Do you know, I'm gonna chuck something at you. I want to chuck this at you because I want you to think. Next week we're going to be looking at Neolithic. We actually did a bit of Neolithic stuff yesterday, but it really didn't go anywhere. So I want to do Neolithic cut marks and symbols, right? And what I want to do is before we finish today, that there's two things that I want us to discuss. And I've just got the book here, right? So yes, so I'm just going to because we've had a few interruptions. I'm just trying to work out what the date is today. It's the 23rd. So it's the 23rd of the 3rd, right? So we'll have another one next week, and we'll have another one the following week, right? And then it would be good to change direction and do something else if you guys want to continue, right? So that would be really, really useful, right? So maybe you could come back to me next week. It has to be something different, and it has to be something that is on the edges of archaeology, and obviously I'll probably think of something. So that's for thought for next week, and that's what we are going to be doing next week. So now there is something very odd when we're going to be doing the prehistoric classes and Neolithic classes with you guys. I'm going to be asking various different questions about various different things to do with prehistory, as I'm already doing when we're looking at Doggerland. But one thing I'm gonna talk about, and this will be quite a lot when we come on to it, is the uses for a burial chamber, right? Other than burying people in them, right? Now, whenever we think about something like Tinkinswood burial chamber, and we think about St. Lython's burial chamber, and we think about West Kennet Long Barrow burial chamber, and when we think about Maes Howe burial chamber on Orkney, and when we think about all these different burial chambers spread across Britain, right? There's thousands of them, right? They're always called burial chambers, right? But a few archaeologists, a few of us, and it's not just me, there's quite a few of us, but there's still a few of us. It's the idea that the burial chambers were only used for burial chambers at the final stage of use, right? Now it's then thinking about what these buildings could have been used for before they were actually used as burial chambers, right? And that's a concept that I want you to start thinking about, because that's something that's going to be cropping up over the next few months, when we're starting to really look at prehistory and try to really understand what prehistory is all about. Because at this minute we've got a massive logjam when we're looking at prehistory, and the logjam is that it's just such a complicated area, and there's so many different directions you can go in, and there's so many different things that you can want to understand and not understand, and so many different ways of looking at the past. And then you can really, the thing is, the past is so simple, right, to understand if you keep it simple, right? It's when people come up with complicated scenarios. You know the other week, now this is a really important point. The other week I sat here, there was 6 of us, right? And I started talking about the roundhouse that I'm building here. And I said it was an absolutely, Stephen, I want to talk to you about that, and I want to talk to Pete about that, and Richard, right? I want us to revisit something, right? Because I need to come back to the roundhouse next week or the week after, right? Now, when I said to you guys, it was 3 weeks ago when we had the decent reception, or 4 weeks ago, whenever it was, I said to you, it absolutely sounds nuts that Stonehenge had a roof on it, right? And Bill, of all people, Bill, the ever-ending skeptic of everything that I ever said, actually agreed with me. He said, "Yeah, that's perfectly plausible." Bill's an engineer, so he's in a better position than you, Pete, and he's in a better position than me. So he's an engineer, right? So he's not here to defend himself, but we're saying that, you know, he actually defended me. And then it seemed that everyone sort of agreed that Stonehenge could have had a roof on it, right? Now we're coming back to that, right? And we're trying to work out this idea, right? And one thing about Stonehenge that I didn't actually mention, and this is really important, that the trilithon stones in the middle are taller in height than the stones around the outside, right? Yeah, so that would mean that if you put a beam from the outside into the inside, it would create an apex. It wouldn't be flat, it would create an apex, right? That's something I'll just chuck in there, right? Because the stones in the middle are taller and whatever, right? Pete, when you've had time to think about it, is the idea that Stonehenge had a roof on it absolute nuts? Is it absolute crazy? Just tell me.
No, I don't think it's nuts, no. Because you had the wooden henge first, didn't you?
Yes, you did. You had the wooden henge at Woodhenge down the road, and still when this is being right, there's 2 points here. Still, when this is being constructed, you had big enough timber and chunky enough timber to move the stones in the first place if you use timber, but you would have needed stone for scaffolding and all the rest of it. So, not stone, timber. You would have needed timber for scaffolding. So there would have been enough timber around to actually assist in the construction of Stonehenge, right? That's a fact. So there may have been big timbers around to actually span the roof, right? Very long timbers. So that's the point. So that's not lecturing everybody. So anything else you want to say about that, Pete, before I ask Steve?
Nothing else from.
Have you got anything to add to that, Steve? Does the idea of Stonehenge having a roof on it absolutely sound back?
Not really, because those souterrains had roofs.
Yes.
So why it shouldn't? I can't think of any reason why it shouldn't have a roof, as much as why did it have a roof? So it's it's section one after the other. Why did it have a roof, and why did it need a roof?
Right, very interesting. What do you think about that, Steve?
I think, I think with all of these things, I say, going back to the point that says it may not have had a roof originally, but then someone had the idea to put a roof on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound to me as if it's completely insane that it would have had a roof. I suppose the only question mark in my own mind would be whether it was built at the same time or whether it was a series of construction projects.
Yes, it was. It was a series of construction projects.
And it just got bigger and bigger. And at that point,
yes,
someone said, well, actually, whether it was a full roof or a partial roof.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me to be completely bonkers that you could do that.
And do you know what? Like this is the same with me building this roundhouse, right? Now, when I started building the this is the thing, right? When I started building the roundhouse, I could have got away with having 4 posts in the middle, right? All connected with 4 beams. I could have had long pieces of timber going from the outside to the inside, right, to create an apex. I could have put purlin. I could have put roof beams and everything there, purlins and everything, put it all together, and all the rest of it could have made life really easy. But I thought, no, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a central circle of timbers, which have lintels on. And then I thought, right, I'll have some timbers on the outside with some lintels on, and I'll put timbers going from the outside to the inside, supported by the timbers on the inside. I didn't really think that was. I didn't really think that. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought that's the way I'm going to do it, right? And then suddenly I'm building Stonehenge.
Over in Jersey, they were building a roundhouse very similar to what you're saying. But where all the roofs came together at a pinnacle at the top, they used a Spanish windlass to bring the whole thing together.
Describe what a Spanish windlass is.
Oh, sorry, a Spanish windlass is a rope around with a bar to it, which you can twist and gradually tighten the whole thing in together.
Ah, thank you, Pete. Thank you. And finally, Richard, you haven't said anything. And sorry, I blanked you out earlier on, Richard. I was picking on you. Go on, Richard.
What we're on about now? A roof on Stonehenge, or?
Yeah, roof on Stonehenge. What do you think about that, Richard? Is it absolute nuts?
Oh, it's feasible at some time that it might have, whether it was originally designed to not have a roof, and so many stages of building there that it's hard, but whether the original idea was to put a roof on it, I'm a bit skeptical on that.
Yeah, but this is actually the point that we've made throughout. Nothing needed to start with an end game.
Yeah.
Nothing started with an end game, and this is the point. I'm not denying what I am agreeing with Steve and you, Richard, right? And probably Pete would say the same. Is that nobody sat down one day and worked out what they were doing with Stonehenge. Nobody sat down and worked. Nobody realised what they were doing with Stonehenge. They didn't know what they were doing with Woodhenge. They didn't know what they were doing with Tinkinswood Burial Chamber. They didn't know what they were doing with. Who come up with the idea of Silbury Hill? Do you know what I mean? It's just this big thing, Nobody actually sat down and believed what they would eventually create. After Stonehenge was created, it started over 6,000 years ago, and they finally completed the stone stuff. They finally completed the stone stuff 1,500 years later.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I know, Richard, nobody has lived that long. How could we have possibly sort of preempted any of this?
Oh yeah, it's a long time. There's a good chance of some time in its history that it did have a roof.
Yeah. So
there had to have been an idea at one particular point in time. They said, "Oh, we need a roof on this," and they did it.
Yeah.
And it would be structurally sound. And the other thing as well is, right, it would be perfect. It would be perfect because everything's balanced, everything's everything works.
Yep.
Everything does work. And then this thing about it being used, Stonehenge being used for the solstice and all the rest of it, I always say that is really strange that the solstice directly aligns along the stones today, right? But in the past, it would not have been like that. The alignment would have been completely different.
Yeah.
Well,
so
the fertility rocks at Avebury are more of a solstice symbol.
It only takes someone to come across one day and say, well, we've had some crap weather these last few years. I'm pissed off coming here. Every time we're here praying.
Yeah.
This is done with rain. We all get so let's get a roof on here.
Sounds sensible, that, Rich. Yep.
Yeah.
And that is really sensible. And the other thing as well is, right, and I'm gonna chuck in the last red herring on this one, right? We get archaeological sites, right? And in China, what the Chinese have done, instead of when they've excavated a site and they're thinking, well, if we leave this out to the elements, it's just going to get destroyed. So we'll put an aircraft hangar over it. And that's exactly what they did with the burial chamber at Mid-Howe on the island of Rousey. They put an aircraft hangar over it. So it's still there for you to see today. And this is 1947. So that's 50, 60, 70, 72, 75 years ago. And it's still there for you to see. So it's exactly the same thing that you've said, Richard, but it's for an archaeological site. God, on that note, are you guys going to be with me next week?
Yeah.
More than likely.
Right, and you, Stephen?
Yeah, I will be here.
Right, and Stephen, if you are interested in this trip to West Wales, you need to let Jessica know tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll talk to her tomorrow morning, Carl.
Because and the other thing as well is there's that's the main trip. There's another little trip going on as well amongst all that. And the other thing as well is I'm going to mention whether Jessica picked up my message or not. On the Saturday, we're all going to come back here and we're going to have a music and wine evening.
Ooh.
In the Roundhouse, which at that point will be completed.
So you've got a deadline to work to, Carl.
Yeah, I've got to get this bloody. I've actually got to get it done within the next few months anyway. So
we do that anyway. We have a music and wine night.
Yeah, but you'll be doing it. You'll be doing it here, Anne. So shut up.
Actually, we missed the music. There wasn't any music.
Well, actually, Anne, we're going to have a bit of debauchery as well. So Jessica's up for it, and everyone's up for the debauchery. Claire's up for it. Rosamond is as well. That's good. So on that note, what I'm going to do, I'm going to call my class to a close. So, Steve, anything you want to say before we finish?
Nothing else from me for the moment, Carl. Thank you. Good session.
I'm glad it's worked today for once. Richard, anything you want to say before we close?
Yeah, you're going to put me back on.
Oh right, yeah. Oh right. What do you mean I'm going to put you back on? I don't want you back on, Rich.
Don't let me come back on.
Ask to start video. Okay. And Peter, anything you want to say before we go today?
No, that was fine. Thanks, Carl.
Okay. Right. Looking forward to this next week. We obviously know what the problems are, so we sorted that out. Hopefully, it's going to work perfectly next week.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say goodnight to Steve, Richard, and Peter, and I'll see you next week. Okay?
Yeah. Good night, all.
Bye, guys.
It's okay, you three.
Yeah.
No night.
Bye.
No night, Steve, Peter. No night. Right. So who have we got left now? So right. Okay, Jess, what's your subject today? Jess is muted.
Sorry, manor houses today.
Oh, right. Did you like the idea of absolute bondage in October in the Roundhouse?
It'd be a bit cold for that, Carl.
No, we're gonna have a log fire burning, darling. You know, we're gonna chuck the keys in the middle, and we're all gonna run around naked. It'll be fine.
I was just thinking of whether we could entice Pat to come. If you come, Pat, to the West Wales, we could share a room.
Yeah, but there is one there is one slight problem, right? You're gonna have to decide tomorrow because there's only three spaces left.
Steve wants to, doesn't he? Oh well.
Actually, Anne, but there is also two other places that will be put on, but that's those two people will be staying in Lampeter, and they will be they will have my company that night, and in Machynlleth everyone will have Jessica's company. That's the difference.
Oh, Pat will like that.
Oh, hey, so Pat, Anne, and you, Pat, Anne,
we'll go to Lampeter.
Well, okay, you know, that's fine. You can do that. No, that'll be good. Right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add you down tonight. So we've got
Oh.
Right. So I'm going to put in that. So Anne tonight. That's good. And Richard tonight. And whatever. So what did you say you were doing tonight? Just manor houses.
Yeah.
Right, so okay, I'm going to end that recording now, and we're going to just see if there's anything in the chat box. Nothing there. I'll hand it over to you. Just give me through. Oh, Jessica, we've worked out the problem in my
So what
session.
was it?